On Military Construction and Veterans Affairs and related agencies, hearing on electronic health record modernization implementation to order. Today we welcome Dr. Melissa Glynn, the Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Dr. Richard Stone, the Executive in Charge for the Veterans Health Administration, and Mr. John Wyndham, the Executive Director of the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization. My colleagues, the focus of this hearing is to discuss VA's implementation of a modernized, interoperable electronic health record system with the Department of Defense, or at least, ideally, that's what we are, what our focus is. The VA is requesting $2.6 billion for the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization, which is $1.1 billion above last year's enacted level of $1.5 billion. The huge increase in cost is requested to support the full implementation of EHRM at 7 facilities in VISN 20 and preparing facilities for deployment at an additional 24 sites in VISNs 22, 21, and 7. This schedule assumes the 3 initial operating capability IOC sites will be deployed this year in fiscal year 2020. Up until the end of last August, we heard nothing but good news on VA's side of implementing the shared electronic health record system with the Department of Defense. We heard how VA was hosting workshops with clinicians all over the country to make sure that there is clinician buy-in, and that the end product would be what clinicians want and expect to receive. We heard how VA and Cerner were working through developing all of the capabilities and interfaces needed to deploy the system at the IOC sites in Washington State, and that it would go live on time, on schedule, and on budget. And then, at the end of August of 2019, and I believe I can speak for all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, we were extremely disappointed and surprised to find out about a delay at the Seattle and American Lake IOC locations from news outlets instead of from the VA itself. Since then, everything was supposedly going well, and the deployment at Manned Ground Staff was still going to go live on time in March 2020. However, a little over 2 weeks ago, Secretary Wilkie called me to let me know that there will now also be a delay at Manned Ground Staff because capabilities were not ready and training was not going well. In a nutshell, this means that the entire IOC deployment will now be delayed. The whole thing. Let me be clear here, my issue is not with the fact that we have a necessary delay. It's a $16 billion project that needs to be implemented correctly and safely from the beginning, and we do not want to compromise patient safety in order to meet an arbitrary deadline. We want to be thoughtful in execution and get it right from the beginning. But on behalf of my colleagues, and more importantly, the veterans that we each represent, we do expect and demand better communication from the VA on ongoing issues regarding EHRM implementation. And the VA, through multiple sets of leaders, does not have a good track record in that regard. Despite quarterly briefings, we are not getting accurate and timely information, and the status quo is completely unacceptable. We are, on top of it all, in a much tighter fiscal environment for this upcoming fiscal year, and we cannot afford a situation where we have delays that inevitably cost us more money. There also needs to be better communication between the VHA, the Veterans Health Administration, the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization, and Cerner as well. My understanding is that the VHA clinicians did not respond well to the iterative training and development process. Clinicians obviously want to be trained on a fully developed system. That is perfectly reasonable, and we want to make sure that we have full clinician buy-in to ensure a successful implementation. But, and I'd like our witnesses to pay attention to what I'm about to say, this is an issue that should have come up well before 1 month before the go-live date at Manned Ground Staff if all parties were communicating effectively with each other. This iterative training process, pointed to as the problem, is specified in the contract. This was a known goal. This was a known process that was in the plan for implementation and the go-live process all the way through from the beginning. So none of the challenges that have arisen should have been a surprise, least of all to Congress. It was a surprise because we would not be, the individuals at the VA have been either less than forthright or not on top of what was going on themselves, both of which are very disturbing and unacceptable. So today, I want to discuss what the IOC delay means for VA's electronic health record modernization across the board, its funding implications, future site deployments, leadership vacancies, and communication with Congress. We have a lot of ground to cover today, and I'm looking forward to what will likely be a robust conversation. So at this time, I would like to yield to to Chairwoman Nita Lowey, who is the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee, for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, and I'll try and stay very calm. Some of you, tell me first, remind me, Dr. Glynn, how long have you been working on this project?
Yes, ma'am, I've been, excuse me.
Madam Chair, this is for your opening statement.
Oh, can I make it part of my opening statement? Okay, I'll give my opening statement, and then I'll have you answer those questions. I'd like to know, frankly, because some of you, and make it part of my opening statement, as you know, you probably remember how Rogers and I have been working on in years, public meetings, private meetings, and we still don't have a system. So I thank Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter for holding this important hearing. I welcome Dr. Glynn, Dr. Stone, and Mr. Wyndham before the subcommittee today. Congress has mandated, financed some version of information exchange of patient records between the Departments of Defense and Veterans Affairs for well over 2 decades. Yet today, the VA still cannot offer this capability to the veterans it serves. The VA is now going into the 4th year of Congress's latest effort to compel this administration to achieve one seamless health record for our service members and our veterans. Over the past 3 years, Congress has provided the VA with a whopping $3.5 billion for electronic health records management. Your budget request for fiscal year 2021 is for another $2.6 billion. This comes on the heels of the latest delay in deployment of the first system at Mann Grandstaff VA Medical Center following the confident statements during last year's hearing. This is a challenging project for sure, but the VA seems to have underestimated, for the, 5th time, 6th time, the difficulty, and you have repeatedly botched the project. Further, while the Joint Federal Electronic Health Management Program Office has been formally established, I remain concerned about its lack of a single responsible individual to hold accountable for the effort's success. The men and women who have faithfully served our nation deserve no less than a seamless and problem-free system, something we have been promising for the past 2 decades. The transfer of health information should ease the burden of transitioning service members with service-connected injuries and illnesses. It also should lay the groundwork for exchange with private sector caregivers, an essential part of veterans' health care. Frankly, I should have checked whether this is my 5th year, 6th year, 7th year. Some of you may remember Mr. Rogers' red-faced anger in private meetings, public meetings. What we really need to have is insight, the ongoing challenges and the steps that are being taken to mitigate future risk. It is our duty to the veterans, to the taxpayers, to realize the benefits of this transformation as soon as possible. Now, excuse me if I get a little overworked about this issue. I'm not sure now. I was going to check whether it's the 5th year, the 6th year. Mr. Roger, it's a many, many years. I don't know why you can't get the job done, and I'm hoping you can explain it to us today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, and thank you, Madam Chair, for helping us ride herd on this. And it would be, your outrage is understandable, and I think it's important to note, in all the years that I've known the chairwoman, there's maybe one other time that I remember her as outraged as she is and expressing it in the way she has, and that's because no one likes to preside over waste and the frittering away unnecessarily of precious time that impacts the quality of life of our veterans and their service. With that, I'd like to recognize Judge Carter for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for representing me, recognizing me. And let me say, I'm very pleased Ms. Lowy went before me because I loved her tirade. And I knew it was coming. I knew it.
You were there
I was there.
over and over again.
Yes. So I'll try to be nice. We're excited about starting the 2021 appropriations hearing season. Probably a lot more exciting than our witnesses are, because this is a very important topic. Thank you, Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, for starting out with the VA Electronic Health Record Modernization Initiative. We've talked about this for a long time. I'm glad the VA is making progress. I continue to believe that the VA needs to get it right. The VA and all its partners on this project must continue to work hard and make good decisions. A lot of veterans, all our veterans, are counting on you. The President's budget proposes $2.627 billion for fiscal year 2021 for these electronic records. This is an eye-popping $1.1 billion over 2020 enacted level. This subcommittee has high expectations for this program, and you better believe, and I think you can see, we are paying attention. I strongly encourage the VA to regularly communicate and consult with this subcommittee as it moves ahead. We all want this to work. We got to talk to each other. Thank you for holding this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Judge Carter. I don't see Ranking Member Granger, and so we have Dr. Melissa Glynn, who is the Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration, who I'll note is actually not supposed to be the lead official at the VA for the implementation of EHRM. That position is currently vacant, and so Dr. Glynn is subbing in, for lack of a better term, and so your full written testimony will be included in the record. Dr. Glynn is the only individual of the three people at the table who will be testifying, and then we will proceed to questions. So, Dr. Glynn, your full testimony will be entered into the record, and you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Lowy, Chairwoman Wasserman Schultz, Ranking Member Carter, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and we hear your concerns. I would like to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation to the Appropriations Committee, and specifically the subcommittee, for your commitment and support for our effort to modernize the electronic health record system over the past several years. Although we are revising our go-live date for Man Grandstaff Medical Center, this effort is poised for success at go-live. And the path to success considers the complexity of our system and its unique requirements to serve our veterans, and the unprecedented collaboration we've achieved with the Department of Defense. Thanks to your support, we have made tremendous progress thus far, working with DoD and our implementation partner, Cerner. We have completed infrastructure investments at our IOC sites and are already seeing improved performance. We are poised to launch our new VA-DoD Joint Health Information Exchange by early April at the latest. This will benefit all legacy and modernized VA and DoD healthcare sites. We are currently testing our centralized scheduling solution in Columbus, Ohio, which will align with the Cerner platform for go-live in April. Prior to our new go-live date, additional capabilities will be included in the Millennium product. Those were originally planned to be added this fall, but will be advanced to be realized sooner. These include online pharmacy refills, appointment check-in kiosks, telemedicine, and other capabilities intended to improve the veteran experience. We are doing all of this and still operating within the 18-month IOC timeline for Man Grandstaff Medical Center. We expect to continue these implementation efforts through our current budget and our FY 2021 request and do not anticipate a change in funding requirements at this time. Please allow me to introduce my colleagues. I'm joined today by Dr. Richard Stone, Executive in charge of the Veterans Health Administration, and Mr. John Wyndham, Executive Director of the VA Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization. As Assistant Secretary for Enterprise Integration, I support the Secretary through leading department-wide governance and support management and execution of major initiatives. My office also leads coordination activities with the Department of Defense, which is vital to this joint endeavor. As you well know, in May 2018, we took steps to modernize our EHR and awarded a contract to Cerner Corporation to replace our legacy system with the same solution adopted by DoD. The objective is to achieve a single interoperable system with the DoD and community healthcare partners. We selected Mann-Grandstaff Medical Center in Spokane, Washington as our initial operating capability site and established an 18-month deployment timeline. You cautioned us not to rush and deploy a product that would jeopardize our ability to deliver the healthcare quality our veterans deserve. We have agreed with your guidance and put in place a governance framework which prioritizes patient safety, balances risk, and enhances user adoption, leverages lessons learned from the DoD. Our program governance is inclusive, it's collaborative, and encourages the Secretary's commitment to engaging employees from the bottom up. As noted, based on Cerner's best practices, our initial deployment schedule followed an iterative model and called for training users when the system build was mostly completed with VA's specific workflows. Earlier this month, our clinicians in the field identified and communicated critical requirements and capabilities that must be available prior to user training. The Secretary listened to this feedback and postponed training so that we will bring the system closer to 100% complete prior to commencing training. A revised go-live date allows us to include additional capabilities intended to enhance user adoption, improve productivity and efficiency for our field staff, and, as mentioned, enhance the veterans' experience. We have provided the subcommittee with an updated project timeline to give perspective on the milestones ahead and the scope and complexity of the task underway. This timeline includes critical milestones in March, April, and May, and we will continue to validate these achievement of these milestones through our governance framework. We will keep you apprised of progress, what we have accomplished, what we're working towards with DoD and with Cerner. To be clear, no other healthcare organization in the world is attempting something of this scale and complexity. We share your commitment to getting this absolutely right for our veterans. Thank you for continued support of the mission. We're happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Glenn. At this time, I yield to the chairwoman of the full committee for her opening questions.
Thank you very much. As you can see, this is an issue that some of us have been working on for at least the past 10 years. And if I get overly angry, maybe I should begin by asking Dr. Stone, or you can all chime in. If a member of our distinguished military leaves the military and becomes a veteran, can you tell me how he can access his medical records, Dr. Stone?
The plan under this fielding.
What is happening now?
Now we're dependent upon the Joint Legacy Viewer that will evolve into the Health Information Exchange in order to transfer records. The Health Information Exchange will not only include the DoD records, but records of 225 commercial systems. That will be fielded within the next month.
Aren't you embarrassed?
Ma'am, I'm not sure. Embarrassed about what?
So that a veteran has all these records out there, and if he needs care for a severe illness, does he still have to put all those records in a box when he goes to the doctor?
No.
Please clarify the process.
So,
and I apologize. You're all very fortunate that one of my colleagues who's been having these hearings for the last years isn't here today. But explain to me how he
So let me tell you-
gets the information to the doctor.
Let me tell you how my care is, because I'm a veteran, and I'm a combat veteran.
Okay.
And so let me explain to you that when I go to Washington DC VA, where I get my care, my provider looks at the Joint Legacy Viewer. The Joint Legacy Viewer is an interface that we have with the DoD processes, and they can bring up my records for care. That will evolve within the next month into a health information exchange that will dramatically increase that to include my commercial records, and so that my commercial records will also be available.
Now, we were told, and maybe it's incorrect, that to have accurate records, the veteran has to pick up the records, take them in a box to another physician. That's not correct then?
That is incorrect.
Okay, I would like to see that in writing and have a detailed record of the process, because if I am getting over emotional, I apologize, but we've been having these hearings for the last 10, 15 years without any success.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Glenn, after 1 year and 3 months without a confirmed deputy secretary, we understand James Byrne was confirmed as the deputy secretary of VA in September, then fired a few weeks ago with only 4 months on the job. Is this correct?
Ma'am, I'd have to check the exact timing, but I believe, yes, he was he was fired from his position recently, yes, and was on the job for several months, but I'm not exactly sure the timeline, but we can validate that.
But what I'm trying to understand, now that there is no deputy secretary, who's accountable for the EHRM?
And the secretary remains accountable for the EHRM.
Okay. Dr. Glenn, Secretary Wilkie decided to delay the go-live deployment dates at Man Grand Staff, American Lake, and Seattle, the 3 sites that would demonstrate initial operating capability. The original deployment date for Man Grand Staff was March 28, 2020. Can you tell me how will the delay in the deployment at these 3 initial operating capability sites affect the rest of the deployment schedule?
Sure. I'm going to ask Mr. Wyndham, who lives and breathes the schedule in detail, to review that.
And when do you expect to go live at these sites?
Ma'am, we owe your staffers on March 10th an updated schedule. I can tell you I've been reviewing various versions of that schedule, and we stay within the 10-month deployment period that was identified by the contract at inception, and that our strategies that revolve around a Block 1 capability, Block 2 capability, are to make us and will make us more efficient in deploying to the enterprise down the road. So we are not exceeding the 10-year threshold identified by the contract and articulated to you before, and we're very comfortable with the efficiencies that we're gaining as part of our present processes.
I'm losing my time, so I'd just like to close. The VA has requested $2.6 billion for the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization for fiscal year 2021. This is $1.1 billion increase over last year. Could you respond?
Yes, ma'am.
And I also would like to know, the last question, in addition to the money, how can we even trust your timetable?
Ma'am, I will come as often as your staff wants me to come to update them on content of our schedule, including provide them project plans and project timelines. I can tell you that the increased budget request is a byproduct of deploying to more sites. In addition, through our IOC efforts, we've identified infrastructure deficiencies that must be rectified prior to deploying a commercial state-of-the-mark solution. As Dr. Glenn alluded to, the infrastructure updates to date at IOC have decreased login times from 45 minutes to 30 seconds. So your support and efforts in our infrastructure upgrades have already paid dividends, and we look forward to bringing on board the new EHR solution.
Let me close by just saying, if I may, for the chairman, how do you plan to spend the $2.6 billion this year? It's $1 billion more than last year, and we still don't have a system.
Ma'am, that $2.6 billion is in 2021, and it reflects the infrastructure upgrades, nearly $800 million, or $1.18 billion, an $800 million increase, because there are more sites that we are deploying to, which means more infrastructure upgrades that must take place. It's very much supportable by any documentation that your staffers need me to provide.
I'll turn this back to my chair, and just let me say, for those of us who've been fighting for these veterans, as you all have for many, many years, I apologize for the anger, but I am furious. Billions and billions of dollars, my friends, and we don't have a system. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and as I noted, your outrage is warranted, and you know, you've expressed it before, and as we move forward, we're at the point now where we have to replace outrage with accountability, and that accountability is going to need to go in this bill. So just consider that notice. Mr. Hurd, you're recognized for your...
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Wyndham, when did you join?
May 2017, sir.
Dr. Glenn?
I have been in my position since December of 2017.
Dr. Stone?
July of 18.
Gotcha. Now, I've been one of the many, I haven't been doing this as long as some of my colleagues that have been kind of outraged. I remember a $10 billion over 10 years in 2015. In 2015, I lamented the fact that our service members are literally being told to print out. This was 2015. This 2015, we knew that was happening. 2016, I said that the initiative risks becoming an expensive multi-year government investment that never delivers the functionality the VA healthcare providers needed. This is all predates y'all's arrival. 2017, I urged the VA leadership to make tough decisions to develop a successful interoperable health record, again, before all three of y'all were there. And then I think I remember last time I tried to get this committee to vote to not allow Mr. Wyndham to leave. Because I will say I am quite shocked that the development has come this far. I was suspicious of being able to meet the 10-month deadline, and the fact that you're now coming, yes, the go live is delayed 3 or 4 months. However, the operability of that go live is going to be increased on what it would have been had you gone live next month. And you're saying that there's more capabilities down the road. So I remain. I think I said cautiously optimistic last hearing. I remain such, and I'm excited for this go live. Now, the chairwoman talked about the 1.2 or 1.181 billion for infrastructure readiness. Mr. Wyndham, you mentioned that this was, if you're going to increase the computing capabilities of the system that you have, the existing infrastructure of 50-year-old buildings and 50-year-old equipment cannot maintain. And this is everything from, being able to cool the system to power the system. Can we talk a little bit about what specifically this 1.1, let's call it, and texting, then we call it 1.2, excuse me. So what is this $1.2 billion going to use?
Sir, you've hit the nail on the head. It literally is a full infrastructure upgrade. The tech refresh plans have not supported keeping our network updated. And so switches, routers, servers, IT closets, desktop computers, you can walk the full gambit. We weren't expecting to spend $100 million at IOC sites in support of infrastructure upgrades. but through your graciousness, the graciousness of these committees and others, you have funded us to make sure we put in place an infrastructure that will optimize the use of the state-of-the-art EHR solution. As we've indicated before, a new solution doesn't run well on an old network. In addition, we run both Vista and the new EHR Cerner Millennium simultaneously on that network as we transition. So it's the full gambit, sir.
Sure. And you said something crazier earlier. You're actually going to the people that are going to use the system and get their feedback?
Sir, I can't highlight enough the encouragement that you provided us to be better partners with DoD. DoD has been phenomenal in sharing their challenges. One of the greatest challenges is make sure the upgrades take place to your infrastructure and make sure you train the people at the local facilities, get them comfortable. This is a change management process. The technology will support what we're trying to do, but the people are the critical elements. As I've said in repeated interactions is we're not outsourcing their brains. Their brains are what's most important. Sure. We're going to give them a tool that's going to make them better, but we've got to get them comfortable on that tool, and that's what this training evolution is about.
Mr. Wyndham, there are smaller projects in what you're trying to do that doesn't seek the customer feedback the way you are. This is the basics of software development. The tests tell me a little bit more in my final 40 seconds about the tests you have already run on the system to do the true interoperability and being able to read both the Cerner and Vista data.
Sir, a comment was made earlier about the iterative training. Well, the testing, we awarded a FAR Part 12 contract, a commercial services contract to implement a commercial solution, which therefore means we're going to employ commercial practices in implementing that solution. This is a commercial practice in iteratively implementing and training. As part of our efforts, we've got various targeted IV events, Integrated Validation Test Event 1 and 2. We committed to the committee to come back and see them in mid-February to give them our go, no-go assessment. And to be honest with you, we followed our schedules and we were prepared to come to you, which we did when we said we were going to come. So the IV2 event failed to deliver what we anticipated. Decisions were made at the Dr. Stone and my level to go see the secretary. We did. He made the ultimate decision, which we think is the right decision.
I yield back.
Thank you. I'll begin my questions just with a preface, and I appreciate the inner tube that Mr. Hurd has thrown you, but you're going to have to swim a little faster than that because, frankly, the communication is absolutely critical for us. We want to have communication. We want to have your feedback and open dialogue, and that simply did not exist in this situation. I'll get to that in a moment in a later question, but our implementation of a project of this magnitude, this significance, this cost, and the kind of arc of the timeline that this includes requires trust. You have, for lack of a better term, stripped the trust that existed prior to things like the committee finding out in the newspaper about delays and being told right up until a couple of weeks ago that everything was on schedule. So that's the line of questioning that I'm going to move through, and also have you help me understand how the trust going forward would be any trust going forward in what you tell us would be warranted. So Dr. Glynn, we received the Secretary's notification yesterday describing VA's plans to move forward on the EHRM implementation. And I understand there'll be two sets of capabilities, one deployed at Manned Grand Staff in July, and an additional set to complete all the necessary requirements for deployment at American Lake and Seattle in November. Besides the timing of deployments, the key things that have changed are the training schedule. End users will train on their versions of the completed system before their respective go-live dates, and an additional 6 capabilities will be brought forward to deploy at Manned Grand Staff when they were originally going to be part of the Block 2 deployment at American Lake and Seattle. And while that update is appreciated, the notification does not satisfy Congress's requirement for an updated deployment schedule to be transmitted to the committee for approval, which has not happened. And I know you and your colleagues are aware of the expectation, and I appreciate Mr. Wyndham's indication that that would be forthcoming on March 10th. But for the record, I'd like to state that we are expecting a full deployment schedule submitted to the committees for approval no later than March 10th, 2020. So, Dr. Glynn, do I have your commitment that I can count on to provide a fully flushed out deployment schedule in written form no later than March 10th? The Secretary's notification yesterday, while helpful, doesn't change that our expectation is to see the go-live dates for IOC, not just the target month, and we want to see the entire schedule when VA sends it to us by March 10th.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. What factors contributed to the decision to delay go-live at Man Grandstaff? And what was the primary factor?
I think as communicated earlier, overall, we've had a process that Mr. Wyndham has highlighted, and many of the, I think it's almost 1,200 clinicians have been part of this process, representing councils that have helped with the workflows and designing the efforts, who work mostly under Dr. Stone's organization. Overall, the team, we conducted IV2, Integration Validation Test 2, in January, end of January, and as Mr. Winder highlighted, there was feedback from the clinicians on the site at Man Grandstaff and others that were being trained that the build of the system was mostly complete, but not fully complete. So they were expecting to see elements that they helped to design, configuration that they expected to see there, and they weren't seeing it. So they voiced their concerns. As part of our management and oversight in my organization, we were pulling those concerns forward, had a scheduled session as we planned with the Secretary to review where we were and to make a decision prior to commencing training. Commencing training reflects an investment of approximately 20,000 hours of frontline staff time, and so we considered this a major milestone prior to hitting the go for the training effort.
And when does the VA expect Cerner to finish developing all the capabilities and interfaces to deploy at Man Grandstaff and American Lake and Seattle?
Our path at this point, and we will go into more detail, is within the next month, early next month, we will have the system completely built, and we continue on, and we will have those interfaces completely built within the following month.
And will the delay have any effect on the Seattle and American Lake locations and the rest of the deployment schedule?
As Mr. Wyndham highlighted, no, we do not expect to have a cascading effect on that schedule.
Okay. Before I yield to Mr. Rutherford, I will tell you that when I was the chair of the Legislative Branch Subcommittee, presided over a infrastructure project, a small one, the Capitol Visitor Center, and that was colossally over budget, colossally over time, and we had similar hearings in which we were told similar things and had multiple hearings after delays and cost overruns. And so I just, again, want to underscore that you should expect that we're not going to be able to just take your word for it anymore, and we're going to have to establish tighter controls over this process. So with that, I recognize Mr. Rutherford for his questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. Mr. Wyndham, if I could, I want to make sure I understand, and I think the chairwoman just confirmed it too. You still expect to be within the 10-month window. Is that correct?
Sir, we have a overall deployment timeline of 9 years and 6 months. We expect to still be within the 10-year framework of the contract to deliver all medical centers and related facilities.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned the network itself, and now this is a lot more than just creating software to integrate two systems. You're actually building the entire network.
Sir, we are upgrading the network. I'm not doing the CIO's job, I can assure you, but we are upgrading the network in support of optimizing the EHR solution. And that's substantial. And again, I applaud the fact that that the Congress has been incredibly supportive financially of that effort, and we continue to be judicious with those resources.
Now, was that deficiency what you found out in the IV2 test, or did you already know you were going to have to do
Sure,
that?
per our contract, we have what's called current state reviews, that prior to deploying to a site, Cerner, along with our technical and functional teams, go to the site, assess the site for technical capabilities to support the EHR, and identify those deficiencies, and then we invest. A key element is that in order to prepare the site, we need to be at least 6 months ahead of the deployment of the EHR with our infrastructure readiness, and we've been getting there again, with the appropriate funding levels.
Okay. And just kind of a legal question here. But most health networks don't exchange data with each other. In fact, they try to control all their data, obviously. How is VA and the electronic health records, how are you going to interface with community private systems?
Through the Health Information Exchange. Now, the DoD system is the same system. So when you talk about interoperability, we've got the same data warehouse. It's the same data that we're sharing. Now, we've got some different processes, but it is the Health Information Exchange.
Okay. And then there was a report in January of 2018 that the telemed records were not standardized. Has that been addressed now? That's going to be in this?
Yeah, that has been addressed.
Okay.
Yes, and it'll all be part of the Cerner system.
Okay, and Madam Chair, I'm out of time. I'm good. Thank you. Yield back.
If you're out of questions, then you're good. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rutherford. Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. Let me reiterate that I've been a part of this committee for a decade, and we have been working on this project for longer than that. And I have been frustrated, as the chairwoman has expressed tremendously over that period of time. But now I'm trying to understand the delays that you've described. Has DOD been a party to the problems that necessitated the delay, or is this solely the responsibility of the VA and the VA infrastructure getting it ready? Because as we started this process, DOD was reluctant to participate. VA was actively moving forward, but now it appears as if DOD is ready, but VA is not. And could I just get you to describe exactly, is there a single system? Will it be a dual system or a tripartite system? The database, as I understand it, will be between DOD and VA will be one and the same. Is that correct? Both agencies will be accessing the same database.
Yes, sir.
The community providers will have to go through another process to get the information from that database. Is that correct?
No, sir. It's when you hear, the data will reside in a platform, a data warehouse called Healthy Intent. And so the clinicians, both DOD and VA, will be able to access data through Cerner Millennium, the EHR system, into Healthy Intent and extract that data.
How about the community providers?
That's why the HIEs are so important. Cerner uses an HIE called Commonwealth. That HIE will come online when Cerner Millennium comes online. In the interim, that's why this joint health information exchange is so important. We'll be bringing on in excess of 200 external providers that will provide us access to that information as well.
What I'm asking is, once the system is completed, how will the community-based partners the private providers, how will they access the system in a timely manner when they are seeing a veteran, whether it's by choice or by whatever program this private provider is going to do?
They can either sign up for the health information exchange or transmit the information the way they have been now, which is usually by fax.
So that means that the veteran who needs to get treatment or who goes to a community provider will experience the same kinds of delays that they're experiencing now.
If they don't sign up for the health information exchange, which is one of our due-outs of our participating providers.
Won't that be a requirement in order for them to participate and to serve veterans?
It is not at this point. The 880,000 providers that are part of our community care network are not required contractually at this time to transmit data because the system doesn't exist yet, but it should be.
I'm saying when the system is completed, won't that be a requirement?
It should be.
You'll determine that, won't you?
Yes.
Well, I'm very frustrated. I'm very concerned about the interactivity. We thought that this would have been accomplished years ago. So I'm losing the hair that I could pull out if in frustration. So I'm hoping that this deadline will be met and that we will eventually, in the not-too-distant future, be able to have the seamless electronic health record modernization system that we've been working on for now decades. That's all I have.
Sure, thank you. Mr. Case?
Thank you. I want to go back to the almost $1.2 billion increase that has been requested. So this is, of course, a multi-year contract, multi-year funding. You must have at the beginning of the contract projected out estimated financial needs for each year of that contract. And I would assume that last year when you came to the committee and asked for the amount that you asked for, you were operating under a financial projection that was probably updated at some point or another, but called for a certain amount that you anticipated asking for this year, right, as well? So in other words, you know how much you're going to ask for each year.
Yes, sir. We generated a 10-year life cycle cost estimate, and that estimate was not predicated on many of the findings that we saw in the infrastructure. And therefore, the OEHRM effort took on board pricing out a more representative funding level to correct the deficiencies that we're seeing in the enterprise.
Okay, so then last year at this time, what was the number, did the number you anticipated asking for this year already include this 1.2? Or when did you know you were coming for another 1.2 above the current year's funding? I'm trying to track kind of how the increase that you're asking for this year has been deviating from your actual financial projections, especially your recent financial projections. When did it happen that you decided you needed another 1.2 over and above the current year's funding?
Sir, it's approximately $800 million, but as part of our 2021 budget preparation process and submittal, we provided the requisite input to our financial staffs at VA, and the process basically has transmitted now what our expected levels of funding requirements exist. So we utilize the normal budget preparation process or budget submission process. So meeting each hurdle, providing the requisite explanations and understanding of what the funding would be allocated to was part of the process that was very detailed over at the VA over the past months.
Okay, I don't think I'm asking my question clearly. What I'm trying to understand is, last year when you came for your funding for the current year, did you know then that you would be asking for an additional 1.2 this year?
No, sir. You heard me allude to the current state reviews that are being conducted.
Correct.
Those current state reviews are what reveal deficiencies. As a matter of fact, we haven't been to every site as is. What we're actually hoping for is that we get to some sites and they're not as degraded as we had anticipated, because again, the current state reviews often take place about 6 months prior to deployment to the respective site. So it would be, I guess it could be done with the allocation of manpower, but we're not going to every site to look and see what the infrastructure deficiencies are. We are going to a representative sites that we intend to deploy to in the immediate term.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that the additional $1.2 billion over and above the current year's funding is attributable to these site reviews that have occurred over the last year.
Yes, sir. The site reviews and projections based on surveys of what we're identifying as deficiencies in those environments. So again, we've got to try to project for you a number that supports the upcoming waves and visions that we're going to deploy to.
Okay. Well, why, I mean, my obvious question then is why did we not know earlier from some assessment of these sites? I mean, somewhere, somebody in pricing this contract must have made some assumptions about the qualities of those sites, the capabilities of those sites, and those assumptions are just dead wrong, it appears, if what you're doing now is coming back and asking for the $1.2 billion. So what I'm trying to track back to is why did we get surprised in the last year with these site reviews that, and were they anticipated, were the risks that the sites were not at that level of capability anticipated and contractually acknowledged and risk allocated? Because one obvious question I have is, well, why are we being asked to pay for that if perhaps these were anticipated under the contract and somebody just made a bid mistake?
So let me make sure. The infrastructure is VA's bill. The electronic health record deployment implementation is a Cerner bill. So they're two separate
So they are
funding
two separate.
pots. Yes,
so
sir.
there's nothing having to do with the Cerner. This is a VA then. There must have been some VA assessment of the quality of these sites early on, which is turning out to be sorely mistaken, which is why you're asking for another $1.2 billion.
When I came on board in the summer of 18, it was clear that the infrastructure was not prepared to accept the Cerner product. We did a full infrastructure review based on what Cerner told us was they needed 1 gigabyte capability in transmission data. And we took a look at our closets. Many of our closets do not have the heating and cooling necessary to maintain switches effectively. The bill for that, to deliver 5E cable across our entire system, is $2.5 billion. That is outside of Mr. Wyndham's work. So you will see in this budget 3 years of $685 million each year or thereabouts in order to deliver the infrastructure that will accept the Cerner system.
Okay, I'm out of time, but it's worth talking about a little further.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Mr. Cartwright?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to follow up, Mr. Wyndham, about people, workforce. It takes people to implement these things and make them work. We noticed that in the transcript of the September 26, 2019 House Veterans Affairs Committee hearing, you told Congresswoman Susie Lee that you had hired about 100 positions and at that time felt you had about 150 plus more vacancies. Here's what she said. She said, okay, in June, Mr. Wyndham, and this was 4.5 months ago. In June, Mr. Wyndham, you told the committee staff that OEHRM was only partially staffed. How many positions have you filled and how many are still open? And you said, ma'am, we filled 102 positions since we last spoke. She said, okay. You said, and we still have our primary goal of 265 to 285 as the outstanding goal, so we feel like we have about 150 plus more vacancies. Do you remember that testimony? Okay. So 4.5 months later, the OEHRM budget request was announced and released to the press and to Congress on February 10. And we saw that page EHRM-488 of Volume 2 contains the following title as the lead into the section on the OEHRM workforce, quote, strengthen the EHRM program's foundation by funding and onboarding government detailees and contractors while simultaneously growing the permanent workforce to nearly 100 government full-time employees. So you were at 102 filled positions in late September, but if I'm reading this right, and I want you to correct me if I'm not, Mr. Wyndham, 4.5 months later, you've gone backwards to almost 100. Is that what your budget request is saying?
Sure. Presently, we have 145 permanent government persons on board. As we initially ramped up, we were composed of a substantial number of government detailees. Those detailees reserve the right to go back to their parent organizations, which a number of them have done. So we continue to hire to that 265 to 285 goal, and I can tell you, we're not trying to hire the wrong people, we're trying to hire the right people. So we're just not an open forum to come get a job. We are scrutinizing and screening because what we're doing is incredibly hard and complex, and I feel very good about the progress that we made. And we're augmenting that workforce, sir, with the contractor workforce. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell Dr. Stone, thank you for providing me, continue to provide support in that arena when necessary.
I'm sorry, I was just asking, so I was reading that wrong? You didn't go backwards, you went forward?
Yes, sir, we are forward. We are approximately 145 to 150 right now.
All right. How close to full capacity do you think you're going to be before the planned IOC go live date happens?
Sir, we've got, right now, we've got about 45 hires in progress, and we expect to be at 215 by September. I can tell you that our government hire are not going in any way, shape, or form inhibiting our ability to go live. Cerner has staffed this with the appropriate personnel to train and educate. We are simply giving another round of training to our clinicians that they desire in support of their readiness. Again, this is about end-user adoption, so I feel good about our staffing profile. I'd always love to have more people, but that's not in any way, shape, or form inhibiting us from go live.
Now, your FY 2021 budget request in Volume 2 at EHRM 482 states 2 of the 3 IOC sites will go live in 2020. Isn't that a decrease from your original plans of having all 3 IOC sites, Mann Grandstaff, American Lake, and Seattle Medical Centers, go live in 2020? Isn't that a decrease?
Let me make sure I explain. So the answer to your question is, our strategy when we signed the contract.
It's a yes or no question.
Well, it's not as simple as that, sir. Right. Is that we were asked, were we leveraging the relationship with DoD and lessons learned? It was a definite lessons learned that you don't want to go live with an excess number of sites before you solidify the capability set. So we simply refined our strategy to ensure that we staggered the deployment to support mitigating risk and going live in the most efficient fashion. So the answer to your question is, it is a decrease from the original projection, but it's within the window that we've always articulated.
And so when was the 2-site decision made to decrease from 3 to 2?
Sure, I have to get back to you on the exact date.
I wish you would.
Yes, sir.
Yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. So just for members' awareness, the votes have been called. There are 425 members not voting and 1352 left on the clock. So I'm going to start the second round so that at least we can make sure you are here for your question, and then we can depart, and I think we'll return because probably members, I know I have other questions. So with that, let me just... I would ask unanimous consent to enter the timeline that I have in my hand here of VA's electronic health record history, which dates actually back to 1983, but particularly beginning from 2001, over a 16-year period until 2017, there were at least 3 major changes in the quote-unquote modernization project attempts for the VA to establish an electronic health records management system, all with costs of multiple billions of dollars. So suffice it to say that this has been a very challenging process that warrants frustration and more accountability. That having been so, without objection, I'll enter that timeline into the record. Dr. Glynn, I alluded in my opening statement that and as you've heard my colleagues say, we're all extremely dissatisfied with the communication and transparency that has come from your office. Hearing about the delay at the American Lake and Seattle facilities through the news in late August was shocking when we had been hearing nothing but good news stories, as I said in my opening statement, up until that point. Hearing about the most recent delay, with the pattern becoming more and more disturbing at Man Grandstaff, was also surprising, given that there was no indication from your office that Man Grandstaff would not go live on time. I mean, finding that out 2 weeks before the go live was supposed to occur is really troubling. So when did you learn that there were issues on the ground at Man Grandstaff regarding clinician training, and was this something that you expected to happen, and what was the timing between when you learned that and determined that you were not going to be able to go live and the notification to Congress?
Madam Chairman, and I will have to check the precision of the chronology, but overall, we conducted the integration validation testing over the last week of, I'm thinking my own travel to Man Grandstaff, the last week of January, beginning of February was the timeline for that set of testing. The following week, there was a review conducted by the site of the users who participated in some of the training and the testing process. So that would have been the first week of February, probably the end, I want to say about February 7th or so, but I would have to check the precision of the dates. Then because of our process, we filtered that up very quickly.
So just to interrupt you, because rather than you going on and on about the timeline itself, what I fail to understand is that you could have been surprised about the problems that existed, and that the disconnect between the communication to Congress about how glowingly and swimmingly things were going, and the sudden communication to us that it wasn't so sunny and that you couldn't move forward. What happened? And were you either you were surprised yourself, and that means someone wasn't minding the store properly, or you were less than appropriately communicative or even truthful with Congress?
I think, ma'am, that we've made a decision to change the strategy by which we're implementing. As we've gotten through this process and continued to build and configure the system, overall, we have determined that...
But were you surprised? Was this a sudden thing that snuck up on you? Or was it something that you were aware of and just failed to let us know?
I don't
or
think...
did someone continue to paint the rosy picture that simply did not exist? Dr. Stone?
Yeah, Madam Chair. VHA is the end user of this product. VHA has an expectation that the product will be built so that we can execute healthcare safely. We always knew that IV2 would be the point in which you would begin to hear the voice of the VHA. Now, the iterative process of building just in time and training on products that are similar to your product doesn't work very well for the VHA. We had expressed this concern 1 year ago to the DepSec. The DepSec got lots of attention. At that time, he was acting. But he knew about this, and I'm sure he got lots of input, but VHA's voice was heard by him. When we came to IV2, at the end of IV2, on the 10th of February, you were going to hear a voice of 4 major communities: our clinical community, our purchase care community under Dr. Matthews, our pharmacy community, and our financial community. All 4 of those communities said, we're not ready.
Okay, so you appear to be pointing the finger at someone who is no longer here to be held accountable. So was the communication from the former Deputy Secretary lacking, and with whom?
I would not speculate on that. I will tell you that he always made himself available to me to express my concerns. I have fielded 5 electronic medical record systems, 2 privately in small practices, 3 large systems in Sisters of Charity, as well as I was the lead person with Booz Allen at DOD on that project. This is my third major fielding. This is high-risk stuff.
Okay.
There's extraordinary risk,
And-
and this is not a surprise to VHA.
Well, unfortunately, if it was not a surprise to VHA, what became a surprise to Congress, and that means that there was a woefully inadequate, almost absent line of communication to make us aware of the problems that have been encountered, so that we were not surprised. So this was not a last-minute awareness for you, but you made it a last-minute awareness for us, and that's unacceptable. My time has expired. We're going to recess, subject to the call of the chair, and we'll return following. No, we don't have time. I'm sorry. I want to get members to, and we'll return immediately following votes. Thank you. Let's call the meeting back to order with the mic on. Okay, so Judge Carter, I have a couple of other questions. I don't know if you don't have any. Okay, because since I had asked the last one, I wanted to just make sure. Thank you. So I left off on communication and the absolute necessity to make sure that we do not have what played out recently ever happen again. We tried Trust Me, and we are now going to have to try Show Me, because that's the only, when you're presiding over a process that expends billions of dollars, ensuring that we have communication and that what was alluded to in the answer to my previous question, which was that there was an element of surprise for Congress, less so for the VA. I'm not going to get further into the finger pointing because it's not fair to do that with an individual who either can't defend themselves and isn't there anymore. But we can never have this happen again. We have had over 16 years of iterations of the electronic health records management program, and this one is going to be the one that gets implemented. So, as I said, I have heard on multi-billion-dollar delayed cost overrun projects as the chair of an appropriations subcommittee before, and since we are in that situation again, we are going to have hopefully similar success as the last time I had to do that, where we finally brought it in for a landing. So I'm not sure that I will be around 10 years from now when that finally happens, but we're certainly going to ensure that we're setting you up for success. Dr. Glenn, I want to go back to, I think, the topic that Mr. Cartwright touched on, and that is your request for $2.6 billion for the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization for 2021, which is a $1.1 billion higher than the FY20 enacted level. So the concern that I have, and I know we've known what the asks were going to be in the process because we've seen projections of what we can expect were going to be requested in multiple fiscal years, but how will the delay impact the timeline of future deployments, and how does the new deployment schedule change the assumptions for the FY21 budget request? That's my initial question.
Yes, Madam Chairwoman, overall, we don't anticipate any changes to the budget request. As Mr. Wyndham has highlighted, overall, we continue to be on track. We will be providing the committee, yourself and the committee, an updated deployment schedule overall, as you requested by March 10th. Mm-hmm. But overall, we don't anticipate changes to the funding request at this time.
Okay.
We are proceeding with the investments in infrastructure, which were highlighted as the drivers for some of that increase in the budget request.
Mm-hmm. Last year, EHRM struggled to obligate funding in a timely manner. You're asking for 75% more funding this year, so how will you be able to obligate an additional $1.1 billion when you struggled last year?
Ma'am, I think as an evolving office, we're gaining efficiencies really every day. The funding commitment that we made to you was be judicious in the way we spent money. I can tell you, ma'am, when you're buying infrastructure and you're buying technology, you want to wait till the last moment possible because you want to take advantage of the evolution of technology and not buy something too soon. So we really did that, and you gave me a commitment to give me 3-year money. And I thought with that commitment was me judiciously using it, carrying over as necessary with a plan on how it was going to be expended. So that's what we've tried to do. I can tell you, we've got
the flexibility that you asked for and that you needed also requires you to make adjustments and anticipate what your ability to expend these funds is. And so if you found yourself struggling to obligate the funds we gave you last fiscal year, then asking for a 75% more, that begs the question, do you have enough staff to handle the increased requirements of what the budget assumes in FY21 compared to
ma'am.
FY20.
And we're committed to meet our obligations, ma'am. Again, there is, we're being judicious. We will continue to be judicious. I can tell you we've streamlined processes. We will have no problem obligating the funds that have been requested now or into the future.
Okay, how many current FTEs do you have on board today, and how many do you plan to hire this year to meet the needs of your office in FY21?
We've got approximately 140 on board today, and we'll be at a 215 level by September 30th of this year as anticipated.
Okay. Dr. Glynn, the Deputy Secretary is actually charged with responsibility for overseeing the EHRM implementation since the first year of funding that we granted in 2018. That is a huge undertaking that isn't in your job description, not in the one that you signed up for. And that huge undertaking could fundamentally change how our country deals with electronic health records, not just for the VA and DoD, but when the government implements something of this magnitude, often it has reverberations. Throughout any system that would use electronic health record system. So one of the most important factors is that we make sure that it's successful. So now that there's no longer a deputy secretary, how will the deployment be affected? Who is currently in charge of overseeing the deployment? And I know you referenced the secretary, but he's got a pretty big job description, and I certainly have a lot of respect for his capabilities, but there's a reason that we designated the deputy secretary to be responsible for this. And does the firing of the deputy secretary have any connection to the IOC deployment delay?
So there are multiple questions. We'll take them and try to unpack them.
Ask them
So
all.
overall, we've put in place in my office, I'm the first assistant secretary for enterprise integration at the VA, and that description and the job title advanced because we knew there was a need with all of the efforts that we have underway and the level of coordination across the agency. And I think that was put in place before the determination and findings were signed off for this effort, but certainly is the case with an effort such as this. Because obviously Dr. Stone is here, but VBA has affected other parts of the organization, the CIO and the OINT organization, and many other parts of the organization are impacted by the decisions that we make as part of the implementation of Cerner. So with that being said, we have a governance framework that is inclusive, that involves OHRM, VHA, all elements of the agency.
The buck has to stop somewhere. Who is in charge of overseeing the deployment on a day-to-day basis?
On a day-to-day basis, we're reporting through the Chief of Staff to the Secretary, and we have a process by which, as we did with this decision, engaging scheduled program reviews with the schedule.
When you say we, does that mean there's not one person that is singularly responsible for that reporting chain?
I am responsible for that reporting chain in my office.
So you are the person that's managing the day-to-day implementation? I'm just trying to figure out who...
From the day-to-day implementation perspective, Mr. Wyndham is responsible for the day-to-day for EHRM. My office is responsible for coordinating the collective enterprise efforts in terms of reporting progress up the chain through the Chief of Staff and through the Secretary.
Okay, so back to Congress's intent, which was that we have a deputy secretary who is responsible for that, to whom we can hold accountable. When can we expect a new deputy secretary to be nominated, and is anyone going to be in that acting role in the interim, or is this the framework that we can expect until that time?
I believe, and we will have to confirm what the timelines are, but I do believe there's an intent to fill that role for the deputy, but we will confirm that.
I was asking you not whether, but when.
I do not know the timeline.
Okay. The secretary is coming next week.
Yes.
You can be sure that I'll ask him. The Federal Electronic Health Record Management Office was set up in FY20, and I'm just going to continue to, unless you, okay, thank you. FIRM, the Federal Electronic Health Record Management Office, was set up in FY20 in the NDAA to act as an intermediary between the VA and DoD. And they're tasked with making decisions on behalf of the entire EHRM program, and that replaced a previous interagency program office, which was set up back in 2008 for a previous failed attempt at an interoperable health record system between VA and DoD, which is why I asked for the timeline to be entered into the record. The original IPO established in 2008 failed. How is FIRM, the Federal Electronic Health Record Management Office, different than the IPO?
Well, I can start off, but I can be joined by both of my colleagues to, we have seen much activity in the firm. The firm has been chartered, has been stood up. It is very active. They're making decisions on a by-agency basis, very inclusively involving different elements of both agencies, and have a biweekly standing set of sessions that help to adjudicate decisions that have impacts on both of our agencies' ability to run the Cerner platform. Mr. Renham?
Ma'am, I led the DIMSM office from September 2013 until January of 2016, and was a byproduct of one of those failed attempts, as you alluded to.
DIMSM is what I eat in a
The
in a
DoD
restaurant.
Health Modernization Office. And so I was a byproduct of one of the failed attempts that you characterized. I can tell you that the evolution of the firm has made sure they understood the previous failings of previous attempts. They are working collaboratively, and more important, they are empowered by the secretaries of each agency. And so I think you're going to see a market change in the performance based on that commitment by both secretaries and obviously those that support those secretaries. And I can tell you the person that's interim right now, Dr. Neil Evans, and the deputy, Ms. Holly Jowers, have been phenomenal and have moved the ball in the direction that you have tasked us to move it. So you're going to see a market change. And it's by understanding the previous failings and also understanding what the objective is, and that objective is interoperability and moving us forward together.
I'm just trying to understand in this entire administration if there's anyone who has a permanent job that doesn't have acting or interim in front of their.
Well, I guess I can report that though interim may be in front of theirs, an active selection process has just completed to select a replacement, and those candidates are being vetted to the appropriate secretariat levels for final confirmation. So I think it's moving the way you want it, ma'am.
That's comforting, except the whole point of FIRM is to act as an intermediary between DoD and VA's decision-making processes, which are very far along, so that one side doesn't negatively affect the whole system. DoD is currently deploying their system, and VA is hopefully going to deploy the system sometime this year. So what does FIRM's role look like going forward, since many of the decisions that it would be quarterbacking and helping to coordinate have already been made before it even existed?
Yeah, the joint decisions that drive interoperability and our success in the interoperability realm are right now being made by the firm and the firm leadership. Areas in data management within the enclave, management of the enclave, data syndication, the things that the doctors need cooperatively to work together. These things are being made. The progress of the firm over the past 9 months has been phenomenal. So it's moving in a direction, and I think the firm would more than welcome the opportunity to come meet with your staff to show them what they have been doing. And Bill Tinston, who leads the PEO, who's my counterpart, is very much aligned and supportive of the firm and their decision-making process. So, ma'am, I think it's moving in a direction, and we may need just to update you on where we are and what functionality they have taken on board, because it's doing just what you've called for.
That would be helpful. Who does the firm report to on the VA side?
To the deputy secretary, which in turn now would be the secretary with regards to in the absence of the deputy secretary. We have executive steering committees that meet.
Dr. Glenn? Is that who they report to?
Dr. Glenn chairs or facilitates the ESCs. Did you want to talk about the ESCs, maybe where we're
So they
bringing
report to a headless horseman. There's no one.
I don't ever want to give you the impression that it's a headless horseman. Leadership mechanisms are there, The secretary who I meet with, who has been signing those documents in the absence of a deputy secretary, has been more than engaged on this. I believe the chief of staff and Dr. Glenn have been incredibly supportive in understanding and moving this thing forward. We're not going to make excuses on why we are not moving forward, because I think the leadership is there to move us forward.
It's just challenging when you have the person who is supposed to be responsible for VA's side of the activity and accountability and communication isn't there, and particularly with firm already behind the eight ball because it was created after many decisions were made. How are VA's interests being looked out for in the process of the implementation of both DOD's and VA's system, and where there are competing interests, because there inevitably are?
Ma'am, I would offer, number one, Dr. Neil Evans is a VA employee who is well-versed, who is a practicing clinician. And I don't want to put words in Dr. Stone's mouth, but has been phenomenal, and he understands the VA enterprise. Right now, our interests could be no better protected than Dr. Neil Evans being in that seat. And he still performs impartially, but definitely is protecting the VA interest. Dr. Stone?
Difference between the IPO, which was only had the ability to convene, and the current firm, as the firm by charter has the ability to make decisions. Neil Evans has not been afraid, as has Holly, to make decisions. The most recent of which is when we made the decision to delay. There was concern about whether that delay would step on top of a major upgrade of the DoD system. They therefore convened the teams, brought some order to that, and made decisions on dates that were available and blacked out for both agencies.
So is it him that should have been responsible for communicating the delays to Congress
I don't think so.
in the absence of a deputy secretary?
No, I don't think so. I think the secretary did exactly what he should do, and that is to inform you when we, by normal course, made a decision.
I mean in a more timely
to
fashion.
delay, which was a good business decision.
Dr. Stone, I'm not arguing about the good business decision. I'm arguing about the lack of timeliness. Should the acting head of firm been more responsible about communicating the delay in the absence of a deputy secretary?
Not in my
or
view.
anyone? Okay.
No, I think this should have come in the way it came now. It should have come faster.
Sooner.
That's a decision. Should we have seen this coming? I don't think we could
Well,
see the status of this.
Before we recessed, you acknowledged that that you were aware of the challenges and there was a failure to communicate, that you were not surprised. We were surprised. You were not surprised. And there was a failure to communicate. Now you're trying to tell me that the communication was timely and that we found out when we should have found out?
So I believe you chastised me right before recess on invoking someone who didn't have the ability to defend themselves. Therefore, I won't. But I'm going to tell you that for 1 year, VHA has expressed its concern that this is incredibly complex. It's not like a commercial fielding. And this is the first time that we've been here at the table testifying before you on this subject.
Right. And what we can't have in a multi-billion-dollar implementation is finger-pointing from the agency who is responsible, that is a multi-headed agency, which is doing this in partnership with another, even more multi-headed agency. And so I can appreciate this is your first time testifying about this particular problem, but this has been a lengthy, ongoing problem, and it has to be fixed. So I look forward to working with the leadership of the VA, including the Secretary, in ensuring that we don't have these kinds of surprises again. My last question relates to the private sector. The Mission Act, and I asked last year, Mr. Wyndham, you answered the question at the time, because my concern was there did not seem to be a lot of emphasis on ensuring that there was a full interoperability with the private sector, given that the Mission Act gives an increased number of veterans eligibility to go out into the community to receive care. And we have a lot of veterans utilizing that. So Has the Mission Act changed your assumptions in terms of the number of expected transmissions from community care providers into the EHRM system? Are there any potential capacity issues with the system as VA providers and community care providers are sending the electronic health records back and forth?
Ma'am, I think we've got the person who chaired the implementation of the Mission Act. What I can tell you is since we have not come online yet, there is no impact whatsoever with the movement of patients. What I can also tell you is that we're working cooperatively with VHA and OEI to ensure that we fulfill the objectives of the Mission Act, even as part of our implementation process and as it relates to the decision support tool. So if I may pass that to Dr. Glenn and Dr. Stone.
Sure. And I think as Dr. Stone highlighted, one of the areas that of particular concern in terms of readiness from a VHA perspective was our ability to support community care. And there is no analog in the commercial environment for Cerner to support set of processes like community care. And it's an area that, I'd say personally, I feel very proud of our leads and how much they're digging in to make sure this is right for the entire system, as well as specifically right for manned grant staff and the planning that has to go on to support outreach into the community and veterans who see private providers in the community so that we can go live. Overall, we are tracking, and Dr. Stone can speak to all the tracking that's going on in terms of Mission Act, the level of utilization by the system. But we are very excited, despite the discussion of delay, that the Health Information Exchange is on track to go live, and that will help facilitate interoperability with the community providers for not just that site that is using Cerner, but at the entirety of our legacy systems under the VISTA environment as well.
Manned grant staff uses a lot of community care. You're saying that they're going to be ready to go live with the community care interoperability when it goes live.
There is nothing that compels a community provider to participate in the Health Information Exchange.
Right, I understand.
Only to transmit in a timely manner by whatever means necessary. One of the things that you could consider is whether there should be the compelling of participation in a Health Information Exchange.
Yeah, and what's your opinion about that?
They should.
I
absolutely
agree with you. It was why I asked the question last year, because you know what, if you set up holes in the system and balls start to get dropped, delays happen once it's completely live.
And then we deal with the scanning issue that we've had to try and resolve.
Right. Okay. Well, that's probably more an authorizing question than an appropriations question. But certainly, I hope you're having those conversations, and we'll have them with our colleagues as well. Okay. So I don't have any more questions, and Mr. Judge Carter, if you don't have any either. So that concludes this afternoon's hearing. Dr. Glenn, Dr. Stone, and Mr. Wyndham, I appreciate you appearing before us as always. We look forward to continuing to talk with you. You can't over-communicate with us, so please don't. And I want to remind the members, the only other one here, that our next hearing is on Tuesday, March 3rd, on military privatized housing, beginning at 10:30 in the morning in the CJS hearing room. That is a 3-panel hearing, so we're going to be here for a little bit, so plan accordingly, and that'll be in H309 in the Capitol. With that, the subcommittee stands adjourned.